Welcome everyone to the Open Skills Network May Showcase on Open Recognition. We will get started here in just one moment. Thank you all for joining us today. We're happy to have you here. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Open Skills Network May Showcase on Open Recognition. We are so excited to be able to dive into what it takes and makes to make something an informal recognition of skills visible and actionable. And we're going to dive into what that means and sort of the history and the debates within this space. And it's really exciting. And we're so happy to have you all here with us today. We want to go ahead and take a quick moment to recognize and appreciate Walmart for funding that has made these showcases possible. So thank you for that. We also want to encourage everyone in attendance to please, as you're listening along today, place your questions into the chat and we'll tackle them at the end of today's presentation. So today's agenda, just briefly touching on this welcoming and some announcements. Then we're going to dive into what is open recognition. Then we're going to have a wonderful, robust panel discussion, some closing remarks, and then it comes time for your questions. So please do think them up, place them in the chat, and we're going to wrestle with them later today. So first of all, our announcements. The new skills collections, some new ones actually, are going to be released next month from Western Governors University, a member of OSN, and we encourage you to check that out on the openskillsnetwork.org website under Skills Library. And then, of course, have you joined an OSN work group yet? We encourage you and we invite you to dive into the conversations like the one we're having today on open skills and open recognition, or technical, or policy, or maybe you have an idea for a work group that you want to start. Talk to us. And of course, let's get social. Share with us your vision of open skills. Join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. And again, we're excited to have you here. Place those questions into the chat. And without further ado, let's dive in to this conversation on open recognition with your hosts, Justin Mason and Julie Keene. And I'm going to let the two of them introduce themselves. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Well, I'm thrilled to be here and so happy to be part of this OSN showcase. My name is Justin. I am Assistant Director of Learning Experience at Clarkson University, and I'm self-described open recognition and open education believer dreamer.
Hey, I'm Julie, Chief Learning Officer at Participate, also pretty dedicated to open recognition. It's been a blast to kind of co-lead this working group with Justin. It's been a real pleasure. And I'm just so thankful for the four panelists that have joined us today. I think everyone in attendance today is really lucky to have these four sort of talking about this really important topic, especially in relation to OSN. And I'm going to let Justin sort of start off with kind of giving a little bit of context. And then we're going to jump into sort of three questions. We had our four panelists sort of think about these four questions over the last couple of weeks. And then we're going to make sure to leave some time for Q&A. So I might be waving my hands and saying words just to move us along. So I hope our panelists won't be mad at me. All right, Justin, go ahead.
All right, terrific. So what is open recognition? Open recognition is both an international community and a philosophy or an ethos for how we can go about recognizing all life-wide learning and skills in ways that include and value all people. In short, it asserts that all learning and skills should count, including those that are acquired outside of formal contexts, such as schooling. One of our panelists, Dr. Doug Belshaw, described it this way: open recognition is the awareness and the appreciation of talents, skills, and aspirations in ways that go beyond credentialing. This includes recognizing the rights of individuals, communities, and territories to apply their own labels and definitions, Their frameworks may be emergent and or implicit. If that sounds a bit like regular recognition that all people and communities do already, I'd say you're right. All people and all communities do already recognize one another. And importantly, those informal recognitions have value to us. Right? So consider this. Have you ever worked someplace where someone is recognized as the unofficial office computer tech support person? Maybe that person is you. Or have you heard from a trusted colleague that someone you haven't met is great to work with? Or imagine if you're a supervisor, matching employees to particular roles or projects. Do the interests and aspirations of those employees are they factors that are worth considering in how you match? Or finally, just think about your own life's learning and skills. How much of your personal development happened in school and how much of it happened out of school? Next slide, please. So the question is not, do we value informal learning and informal recognition of skills and other traits? Clearly we do. The question is, are those skills from the workplace or our community visible to those outside of those spaces? Much like this metaphorical iceberg, our current systems for recognition make only a fraction of the valuable learning of our lives easily visible to others. At the top of the iceberg is formal schooling. That's the visible part. Successful completion of school is made visible by transcripts and credentials such as diplomas, degrees, and certificates. But that does not represent the totality of your life's meaningful learning. And it might not even represent the majority of your life's learning, because you also learn through your work. And that may take the form of training or participation in professional communities of practice. You may learn by taking classes at your local library, or by meeting up with people who have similar interests to you, what we might call affinity groups. And of course, much of your learning is self-directed. You learn through experience, reflection, and personal study. This is our challenge in open recognition, to develop more inclusive systems of recognition and grow those systems alongside current formal systems for recognition. And in so doing, foster open ecosystems for recognition where all learning and skills count and all people are valued as recognizers. So at the top, I mentioned that open recognition is also an international community. That community grew out of earlier communities, such as the Open Digital Badges community and the European EPIC ePortfolio community. In 2016, members of these communities drafted and signed the Bologna Open Recognition Declaration, which called for a universal open architecture for the recognition of lifelong and life-wide learning achievements. And you can still sign the 2016 Open Recognition Declaration, and I encourage you to do so. In the chat, you should find a link to the Bologna Open Recognition Declaration, and note that if you sign it, you can apply for a badge to recognize you as a signer. In the spring of 2021, Open Recognition members proposed adding a recognition workgroup to the Open Skills Network. We saw that OSN's work to build networks of open skills frameworks was a critical step in building the kinds of open and inclusive recognition ecosystems that we envisioned. And we believed that our focus on opening recognition to value the contributions of all people and communities and organizations could do well to support OSN's goal of building systems and tools for the equitable recognition of skills. Everyone is welcome to join our Open Recognition Workgroup. We meet every 2 weeks, and our deliverables include the following. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, previous slide.
Yeah, you had it, Christian.
We host presentations and discussions on the topic of inclusive, equitable, and open recognition of lifelong learning. We have drafted open recognition principles. We assist other OSN work groups, such as the technical and policy work groups, by identifying and communicating recognition use cases that exist outside traditional formal education. We support the development of accessible options for authoring skills frameworks. And finally, we will create an open recognition guide for the OSN and its partners. Next. Now, I know it's bad practice to read tiny text off of bullets, so apologies, because that's exactly what I'm about to do. Open recognition is committed to making all recognition of skills visible and actionable. We believe informal and non-formal recognition have legitimacy and value by themselves and do not necessarily require translation into formal systems such as credit hours or university-defined competency frameworks. We believe individuals and communities have a right to name their skills and contribute to the larger community of skills definitions and frameworks. We are committed to developing tools and networks that recognize not only standardized top-down skills frameworks, but also foster the emergence of dynamic and future-oriented bottom-up skills frameworks. We're committed to facilitating partnerships that value individual and community-generated skills frameworks and RSDs. We're committed to engagement and amplification of non-dominant cultures, new majority learners, marginalized communities' own definitions of RSDs, and providing pathways to expand and or create frameworks. And finally, we believe that the nature of skills is dynamic and evolving. Skills held by an individual may deepen or atrophy over time, and skills definitions will evolve with job markets, technologies, and advances over time. And with that crash course in open recognition, I think it's time to introduce our panelists.
And because I'm just having fun just listening to everybody and not talking, I am actually going to let this incredible panel introduce themselves. But what I would say is that they've been really active members in their own communities, pushing this work forever. Many of the panelists here are involved with that open declaration, the Bologna Declaration that Justin mentioned. And just have been huge and generous contributors to the Open Recognition Working Group. So I'm going to pass the torch to whoever would like to introduce themselves first. And I think I'm going to let that be, who's up first? Who would like to introduce themselves first? Just unmute and go for it.
I can do that. Hi, everyone. My name is Crystal Rawls, and I am a representative of California State University, Dominguez Hills. So we are based in Southern California and represent the largest public university system in the United States. As a workforce development person, I see skills that go unrecognized and undervalued because they're not evidenced enough through formal systems. And my participation in this group really wants to disrupt that idea and explore the impact of empowering previously suppressed communities and see what would that do for industry outcomes if we were able to use systems like this to universally recognize people. I'm gonna bounce it on over to Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. So I'm Doug from We Are Open Co-op. As you might be able to tell from my accent, I am the other side of the pond. So I am just north of Newcastle upon Tyne, if you know where that is, just south of Scotland. And I think I've worked in every sector of learning, so formal education, vocational skills, whatever. I was on the original Mozilla Open Badges team, and I've realized that my career has basically been focused on trying to make the world more open and transparent. And I think we can achieve that by decentralizing power. And I see open recognition as a way of doing that. I'll pass over to Don.
Great, thanks, Doug. So Don Prezant from Winnipeg in Canada. We're currently in a spring flood situation, which actually puts me in mind of how ideas are just brimming out of this Open Recognition Working Group. That's my joke, and that's my single joke. I wear three hats. I'm an Open Recognition ambassador. I have a living badge to support it. I consult on digital recognition projects, and my company, Learning Agents, operates cancred.ca. It's a leading badge platform in Canada based on Open Badge Factory technology. I'm going to pass on to Carrie.
Thanks. Hey, my name is Carrie Lemoy. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I'm actually just down the street from Julie, exactly like 3 minutes. We've timed it. I'm a technologist and a researcher. My research has been about the adoption of trustworthy technology. I've also been working on open badges for a very long time, pretty much since the very beginning. My focus lately has been focused on implementing Open Badges 3.0, which is aligned with the verifiable credential standard. This can give people more control over their badge data and make that data more secure and verifiable. So I really believe that having agency over data is one of the steps towards creating more positive and humanity-centered technologies, and I think open recognition fits into that really well.
Awesome. All right, well, we're going to get started on our questions and have the panelists sort of go through and sort of talk about these questions from their perspective, and then get conversational with it a little bit, even with the slides and the WebEx format. So Justin, you want to shoot out the first question?
Yes, love to. So, panelists, what does open recognition mean to you, your organization, your work, or your community, or just from your perspective?
All right, next slide, Christian. Next one. Yeah, there we go. All right, Doug, I think that's you. I know that.
Yeah, cool. So I am drawing very much on the artwork of Brian Mathers, who's a member of our co-op. You might have seen his work in and around the kind of Badgers community quite a lot. And we were talking about this particular image, and I think it's in a recent blog post on our blog.weareopen.coop to kind of go into a bit more detail. But when we're talking about credentialing, really that's only part of what we want to do in life. And we've started to hint at this when we were introducing ourselves as panel members. What we're trying to do is recognize one another, and credentials are one way of doing that. So if we think back to like the original white paper for open badges, I think we've done a really good job of like the credentialing side of things, because we're now at the stage where millions of badges are being issued every year by people who, you know, if you go and ask people about IBM, they've heard of IBM and Salesforce and people. So you can say like these large organizations that you have heard of are issuing badges, and that's great. And we see people sharing them on LinkedIn and social media and stuff. They're a thing. But the other side of the equation, the open recognition side, the peer-to-peer aspect of things, somewhere where we don't have an authority in the middle, and that authority might be a technical authority, it might be a professional body. When we take that out of the equation, we don't have as much of open recognition where there's the peer-to-peer recognition of one another. So to me, the reason why we have an open standard is so that anyone can issue credentials, recognition, whatever we want to call it, to anyone else without having to ask permission. And that's what's so revolutionary about badges, verifiable credentials, any kind of open standard that we can use to recognize one another. And at the end of the day, this might be useful for employment. It might be that someone gets a credential or is recognized and gets a job out of it. And that's great. And we should aim for that. But also, there should be cases where people are being recognized and it's got nothing to do with getting a job. And I think we need to focus a bit more on that now that we're, 11 years into the Open Badges standard, etc. And we can go into details about the kinds of open recognition that we'd like to see, which are different to credentialing. But that, for me, is where we should be and where we should be moving towards. We've kind of already done the credentialing bit pretty well, I think.
All right, so next step, yeah.
And so that is a really excellent place to be able to come in on. So I'm in higher ed, and it's important for us to be able to evidence, right, things that people have done. But one of the challenges comes in when you have previously excluded communities, right? So they're not being seen. Their voices are not always heard. Ways of knowing are not always seen. And so where formal systems don't recognize, I see open recognition as an opportunity to disrupt that kind of pattern and to recognize each other as peers, and to recognize ourselves, right? And so Doug said, you know, maybe it goes to, right, how do employers use this information later? But one thing I've found dealing with, in particular, first generation students, and I'm going to talk a lot about them, is that they need to see themselves through others' eyes sometimes to recognize their value. Often, some communities are excluded from the majority language of what good is. And so I shared with my friends on LinkedIn, right, that I was going to mention a few of them here, because there's one way we recognize people. We do citations here in academia. So Madeline Battison Butler, who does DEI work, is extremely impactful to me on LinkedIn. I read a lot of her comments, so I cite her work. And that's one way to do it within the boundaries of higher ed. However, there's also Riley Balling, and he does some career development work. And I told both of these people, I'm going to let you guys know, their work is really important to me. And just letting him know that in that day, it mattered, right? Even for myself to recognize in this day, it mattered. It might be the one thing that keeps me persisting. It might be the thing that keeps me encouraged, motivated, or energized. And maybe today that's not linked to my employment outcomes, but eventually it is, right? This recognition of the ways we impact people can really really open our communities, all of our communities, work, academia, to a whole nother way of seeing one another. So I think that open recognition is not only so that employers can see me, that's nice, that's great. Not only so my school can see me and recognize me, but so that my peers can see me, so that I can see me. And sometimes we all need that little bit of something. And so that's why I do this particular work. And if we can, right? So back to my example of first generation students. If you look at the language of how we talk about first generation students, these are definitions pulled right out of a dictionary, right? The way we talk about people is in relationship to a standard or an expectation that really doesn't have much to do with them. But what if we talked about first generation students in terms of themselves only, not the parents' college degree, right? Or not whether or not they've declared their lifelong intent to go toward a career. But what if we talked about them the way I talked about Riley or the way I talked about Madison Butler, right? How they inspire us. And if we just think about that for a moment, even my introduction, how I introduced myself according to the standards that we expect, my name, my school, my job title. But when I explained why I'm here, I used different language. And that's one of the open recognition principles that the open work group principles that we've talked about. I should be allowed to use language that is familiar and comfortable and safe for me to describe me. And that should be seen. And that's kind of the reason and the why of my work.
So awesome, Crystal. Don? Oh, next slide. Yep.
So I came to open recognition through the doorway of prior learning recognition, e-portfolios and things like that. The trouble with recognition of prior learning, or PLA as it's often called in the US, is that it's quite formal and often not very open or accessible. Usually it's up to the institution how they might want to recognize your learning for academic credit, and it's often a really difficult process to navigate. So this image from a European document from around 2016 does a great job of situating open recognition in the context of other dimensions of open education, such as content or OER, open pedagogy, etc. But just bear in mind that this recognition is still for formal academic credit, not necessarily for other purposes. So what if you want to be recognized for other reasons? And informal or non-formal recognition is good enough, or as they like to say in the UK, fit for purpose. So if we can move on to the next slide. This image, open badges are flexible containers for recognition. I'm very grateful to Doug Belshaw for the first version of this Venn diagram that I've sort of adapted and actually used countless times in my own presentations. So where it's a spectrum of recognition, spectrum of formality, open badges are a portable subset of digital badges that can also include non-portable site-specific badges like the ones you might find on Khan Academy. And as you move to the left, you start increasing the formality and start getting back to those same old academic credentials and their issues that open badges were intended or invented back in 2011 to disrupt. So that's why I like to say that open badges are more than micro-credentials, which are more than stackable course certificates. So we can move on to the next one. So Serge Rave, who's actually on this call, has been a thought leader in this space for some time. And you can find this diagram at openrecognition.org. And the point of this matrix or plane of recognition that was put together for some projects over in Europe is that formal recognition based on an auditable, summative assessment is not always the goal. Sometimes it's informal recognition, appreciation, self-recognition, recognition of others, such as Crystal was talking about, aspirational recognition or forward-looking type of recognition. I'm on this journey to here. Goal-oriented recognition will have more of an impact on the individual, the learning journey, and the community at large.
Thanks, Don. And Carrie, sister after my own heart, no slides, love it.
No
How
slides.
do you,
Sorry about
yes. So how does this mean to you? And actually, this is actually a good visual for, I think, some of your thoughts. So yeah, go on.
You know, of course, I agree with all of these things and everything what everybody said. And maybe it sounds basic, but I think that open implies that that recognition means that how we use our data and what is in our data and how this recognition happens. That it's contextual and very personal. So I like to think of open badges as more than just a credential, but more like a construct where we can collect data that represents what makes us who we are. And this is whether we share it with anybody or just keep it to ourselves. And this data could be claims that we make about ourselves or claims that others make about us that we agree with. And the data is structured, right? So I'm a technologist, and I think a lot about like what is the structure of open badges and what is the structure that the metadata can take hold of, right? That it can hold and understand that data could always be understood by both machines and humans. And this data contains context and the details, such as the rich skill descriptors, which we're talking about at OSN, but also evidence. And all of this contributes to increasing understanding. I would say that the structure also opens up possibilities of how recognition information can be used and expands the open recognition usability even further. You know, right now we see pathways, right, predetermined pathways using data that is being like put in front of people. But think about how we could use this data to actually construct our own like personalized pathways and then make those or even make like social connections. And so this is thinking about open recognition in terms of the technology and then the data behind it and what that can mean too.
Awesome. And I'll say, our work at Participate and also just with this working group around communities of practice really speaks to what everyone is saying, because the thing in a community of practice is how we engage with one another and how that shared practice amplifies all of us. And so the ways in which you actually recognize collective knowledge is so critical. So we've talked a lot about recognition. Obviously, a lot of our work has really grown out of the open badges and that history. So why do we think open recognition is an important aspect to OSN's work? Like, why did we, when we meet every 2 weeks, why is this important for an organization and a network like OSN to be including open recognition as part of its mission? And I think let's push the slide and then we'll know who's going to talk to this first. Okay, that's Doug.
Me again. Okay. So just, I'm going to have a different probably point of view to other people because I'm in the UK, which I'm still saying is part of Europe, even though we had Brexit. Okay. So I'd still have a European view of all of this. And I think in Europe, we probably have more of a historical apprenticeship model, maybe, than North America. I don't know. There seems to be some kind of difference anyway. One thing that's certainly the case, I think, in the UK and the US and elsewhere is that people love to talk about the skills gap. Yeah, there's lots of talk about the skills gap. But I think there's also a recognition gap as well. Because when we talk about the skills gap, I think that we're not recognizing the skills that people have when we're trying to put people into boxes. So I've been ranting on LinkedIn this week, for example, of everyone seemingly having the same text in their about thing and just changing a few words. And like how weird that is that everyone would put themselves in the same box. And I think it's actually done from a machine readability, and I don't know, because people can't think of their own about page. Anyway, this is another example from Brian of trying to get to what we mean when we're talking about the difference between credentialing and recognition. So there's a lot of football, soccer finals at the moment, it's the end of the season. And so there's people being lifted up on their teammates' shoulders holding a trophy, and the trophy would be the credential. But the lifting up on the shoulder and the roar of the fans is the recognition. Now, if that credential, if that trophy was just kind of tossed to someone and there was no recognition, the credential wouldn't mean anything. Like the recognition is the thing that wraps around it. That's the important thing that matters. Now, I notice on the OSN page more generally, when you go to openskillsnetwork.org, it talks about reducing historical inequities in hiring, and that's absolutely something that I think everyone would agree with. It also says about hiring more people for what they can do. And if we're going to hire more people for what they can do, rather than trying to put people in pre-existing boxes, then we need to meet people not just on large organizations' terms, but in terms of what makes sense for individuals and communities. And I don't think we should forget that most people in the world, even in Western countries like the UK and the US, are actually employed by small and medium-sized businesses, or indeed they're self-employed. They're not, like most people are not employed by large businesses, and I think sometimes we forget that. So there's a tool which I don't think has been referenced yet, but will be, called OSMIT, and I'll let other people describe what that is because I'll do a poor job of explaining it. But it's a tool which allows you to list, capture, show, describe, value, whatever, knowledge, skills, and understanding. And I think what we need to do from an open recognition point of view is to showcase and foreground that knowledge, skills, understanding, dispositions, ways of being, which aren't currently recognized in the system, and foreground that and be able to narrow that recognition gap as well as the skills gap as well. Who's next? Is it
Yeah.
Don again? Yes.
That is me, yes. So this picture is from a community in Wales. It's right by a shopping center, but I think it makes a great metaphor about the problem with pre-planning pathways for people. So basically, straying off pre-planned walkways actually has a name. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that name. It's called desire paths, and I think that's a great metaphor for what we're talking about. Or maybe you prefer the idea of navigating a climbing wall, which is something I used for a project overseas a couple of months back. My friend Serge Rivet in the audience, so I have to mention him again. He likes to say the map is not the territory. And I guess another way of saying that is your career is not a curriculum, it's a journey. It's not about disembodied skills, as Doug was saying. It's about capabilities that are embodied in people who are navigating their individual lives. Doug's been featuring recent work by Brian Mathers. These are some Brian classics on the right that help illustrate that there's more to learning and development than following a pre-planned pathway or recipe. Most of our learning does take place outside the classroom. That's the point of 70-20-10 learning, and we should be able to do a better job of capturing, leveraging, and following that learning that takes place outside the classroom. So if we go on to the next one, this notion of capturing lived learning is a key component of the Lumina-funded Credential As You Go initiative, which may have been featured on this in this OSN community before. Phase 2 of Credential As You Go is now road testing the incremental credentialing framework you see here at 18 institutions, apparently across 3 states. And I was just seeing how Nan Travers, who's one of the key authors of it, was presenting today in Iceland about that. Well, one of the things I like about this is that prior learning is only one of the verticals. It's the one on the right, retro as you go. And external learning is a great example, plain language that can include things like work-based learning contracts, apprenticeships, as Doug was talking about, and even mission-based careers. So bear in mind, though, that this is still directed towards academic credit. It's about getting credit, but it's certainly starting to open up recognition, as that European image was talking about earlier on.
All right. Wait. So Crystal, I want Crystal and Carrie some time to jump in here on the sort of importance of the OSN's role. Are we good? Do we have everybody in there? Everyone got to weigh in?
So on,
Go ahead, Kristen.
yeah. So I just want to briefly say, right, recognition is a tool to empower, and we have to be intentional about it, right? And in my worldview, we have to be as intentional about opening our eyes to recognition of previously disenfranchised communities. Basically, in a nutshell, keep that same energy we kept to disrupt their world, right? To invalidate them. Let's keep that energy validating them. And I see open recognition as this disruptive piece to say, yes, Open Skills Network, we're going to categorize these things, we're going to validate, we're going to do all these things, but we're also going to remember the people, and we're going to let the people speak for themselves. I see that open recognition is that wedge that keeps the door open. Literally open.
Literally open.
Literally.
Yeah. Carrie?
I think maybe what I'm going to say is probably just incredibly obvious, but I'll say it anyway. I think it's important for organizations like OSN that are working in this credentialing and LER space to keep in mind that even if there's this like worldwide global aggregate of rich skill descriptors, that learning and life experiences are still always going to be personal and contextual. So, for example, even if there's a software engineering 101 course and it was described and taught exactly the same way in every circumstance, exactly, right? Pinpoint. The learning experience would still be so unique that the rich skill descriptors only really paint part of a picture of what is being what is happening. It doesn't actually describe what the individuals are experiencing and demonstrate. And I think it's important to keep this in mind, because rich skill descriptors are just one part of this like really much more bigger personalized data set. The Open Badges data standard can expand upon this. It can include individualized evidence, and individuals can also do things like self-assert their own skills to elaborate on their own journey. And one other thing is that my understanding is that OSN is also considering how tools like OSMIT can support individuals and communities to create their own skill descriptors. And I think that if we're talking about informal, non-formal skills, and informal skills being discussed as being similar, then it should be true that anybody who's participating in this network, or anybody should be able to participate in this network. And that I should be able to make self-assertions about skills and add them to this collection of data too. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. We're the disruptor gangs.
Just to build on
Good.
what Kerry
And-
said there about the self-issued badges, this is something which I thought was going to be a much bigger thing than actually is. And there's a wonderful image from Brian which kind of shows that. And I remember it must have been about 2014. Someone applied for a job at Mozilla using self-issued badges pointing to evidence, which I thought was such an awesome thing. I don't think they ended up getting the job or whatever, but the fact that you could basically create like your own little e-portfolio pointing to evidence rather than just claims about what you've done seems like such an awesome thing to do. And there should be more of that in the world, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, one other thing to say in response to that is, isn't that how life really works? I mean, we have our personal narratives, we bring them with us, and that's what we do. So shouldn't the technologies and other credentials support that, right?
Yeah, perfect segue, Justin, for our last question.
Absolutely. Okay, so last question. Dream big. If open recognition systems were operationalized successfully, what does that look like? If you can, tell us a story.
I'm going to not go first this time. So someone else want to go.
I think that's my slide. Okay, so this is a story I'm really, really eager to tell. I work with Open Recognition Workgroup, and I don't have exactly the technical skill to do some of the builds myself, but what I do have is an experience that I would like to bring out a little more to the world and see what impact that would have on our economy. I work in an institution where a lot of our students are identified as first generation. And if you remember in the slide, that's definitionally explained as their parents don't have terminal degree of any type. But that's not about the student, right? What I've come to find out about working with first generation students are they have a set of skills that really could be useful in the workplace, and our employers are saying, hey, we need more of these common skills, more of these types of things, right? Persistence, the ability to explore, and I have some common definitions in there. But what if when our first generation student came to school, we didn't handle them with this deficit language of saying, oh, your parents don't have a degree, so they didn't have enough information to tell you. But what if we approached them and we said, hey, you came, you did something no one else has ever done. What a risk taker. Do you know how risk taking will impact your future? Let us recognize you for that. And this is your first step onto the journey of being, of recognizing your potential as a first gen student. Let's think about the curiosity, the bravery, the willingness to explore. All of these are research skills. And you know how I know? I'm a first gen student, right? And they came in with this, oh, let us help you with this. But what they did not give me, what I did not have, was recognition that I came in the door at 33, a whole life, a whole career, a ton of skills. I just lacked some information. But instead, I was treated like somebody who was some type of pariah in the scope of education. Instead of the brave, exploring, risk-taking curiosity adult who had made an informed decision that I wanted something better. This is how we empower tomorrow's generations. This is how we use open recognition to move a previous, come to the academy or come to this job or this training or get this degree and be all things and say, I see you. I see who you are and what you bring to the table. And we can evidence this, right? Just like I can tell my story, I can provide evidence of every one of those moments, including applying to undergraduate school, not knowing if I was ever going to get in, but it was worth my time, effort, and I tried and I did it, right? Let us recognize this in our first generation students coming out the door and see what impact that has on persistence, retention, graduation. So that's right. That's my big dream. If we could go to the next slide, because I'm reading the chat, I forgot to type my little n. Right? So the big vision, right? We come in, we're starting with the heart. We're starting with recognizing people, with seeing people. And through this, now they see themselves as learners, as potential, with potential, and they're getting these micro credentials. There's room for all of it, right? There's the education, the recognition, the degrees, recognizing time with badges, intern badges. And then what does success look like, right? Now it's not, can you see me now, but I know my worth. And now I have some tools to negotiate salary, to assess my skills, because I'm not burdened with the language or perception of a system that says, oh, your parents didn't have a degree, so you must be deficient. And so this is my big dream. I really hope that we get to see this in my lifetime, because I know the demography of our nation, we need to see the talent and skills that are there instead of looking for that unicorn, so to speak.
Amazing. That is a dream we all share.
So I think that's me. The author, William Gibson, told us the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And what I want to show you here are some of what Crystal and Doug were talking about. These are actual badges that can be found on Open Badge Passport today. Ways for learners to tell their stories and make their cases, sometimes using prefab scaffolding, sometimes making up badges from scratch. The Wiki Badges platform is an interesting proof of concept. It's a place for organizations and individuals to collaborate on badge metadata in the open. And you can then pull that into badges that are issuable by peers or individuals, or individuals for themselves or by organizations. So over on cancred.ca, if we can go to the next slide, It's at canker.ca. It's a Canadian version of Open Badge Factory. We're exploring how the affordances of open badges and open badge factory technology can help align people and their badges and their lives to things that matter to them and can make a difference in their careers. We have an open reference hub we're working with right now called goframeworks.io that's currently doing that lifting for us. And so we're able to map badges to skills frameworks, but also to things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Could be to knowledge domains like as in ISCID subject domains and things like that. We're also looking at ways of endorsing and aligning badges after they're issued, because that's more learner-centered and future flexible. So we can go on to the next very messy slide. This is a diagram that attempts to show the scope of what we're currently looking at, and it's something that I keep on coming back to as I engage with the Open Recognition Working Group, trying to stand up ways of mapping to these things to add value to the credentials. So next week it'll look different, I'm sure, and I'll echo William Gibson again by saying the mileage may vary, but you did say dream big.
We did. Carrie, you want to jump in? Doug, you want the dream big?
Sure. I don't have too much to say about this, although I have all sorts of ideas. I kept it pretty light in the planning. I like to imagine using open recognition as a way for us to learn about ourselves and about our communities and how we navigate this world, which is really hard to navigate. And I think we need more open recognition resources in tech, maybe integrations into applications like LMSs or social learning platforms where this activity can actually happen. And that way they can be this tech could be used to help us discover our passions, to learn about our behaviors, and to connect to others. And while all of this could lead to better jobs or more opportunities and make more money, which everybody needs, it could actually also just serve as a personal history and legacy, which is also critical to future generations, not just to us. And all that said, I just have to always say that I can't say enough about how critical it is that we prioritize privacy and giving people ultimate control over their data, no matter what situation we put them in to create it. I always have to say that. So thank you.
Thank you for continuing to say it, Doug. Yeah.
Yeah, so just +1 to what everyone said so far, because you're all very smart people. I could talk about this kind of stuff till the heat death of the universe, as I'm sure everyone else could. But just to give it a different perspective, so I don't work for like a for-profit organization. I don't work for an institution. I work and co-founded a cooperative, which when you go to a conference like I did today, takes a bit longer than when you introduce yourself as a teacher or a researcher like I used to be able to. So when we founded this cooperative 6 years ago, we had no clue what we were doing. We were making up as we went along. Where some of us had worked at Mozilla together, Brian Mathers joined us, etc. And we're now part of a network of about 40 tech co-ops. I'm going to put the links in the chat there to our co-op and the network of co-ops. So that network is important because the way that we scale isn't vertically, as in hiring more people. It's horizontally, as in working with sister co-ops within the network. And we all own our own businesses. So it's a very different kind of way of thinking. So we have to recognize one another. And one of the ways we recognize one another is by working with each other and recognizing one another's skills. But we don't currently, for example, issue badges to one another for the recognition of skills. And how that develops is a very ad hoc kind of way. There's no centralized registry, for example, of, Outlandish, which is another co-op, has these skills. We just kind of know them. And any time that we try and think about doing that centralized registry, it becomes difficult. So a tool like Osmit, which I seem to be the only person who's mentioned so far, I was expecting other people to, would be quite useful in terms of recognizing, for example, skills for cooperation and sociocracy and decentralized decision-making and privacy and all those kinds of things, which aren't currently as important maybe in for-profit world, capitalist organizations, etc. So in general, I want to live in a world with more decentralization of power, more cooperatives, more B Corps, more people owning their own businesses. And I think that the principles underpinning open recognition that we've all talked about can help with that, especially if we're issuing credentials, badges, recognition, which are based on skills frameworks that we have helped define, rather than skills frameworks which we're having to adapt ourselves into, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I could tell a bit more of a story around that, but I don't think we've got time, and I'd love to have time for questions as well.
Yes, so let's turn to that. I don't know, Christian, I don't see a ton, and I cannot imagine that the folks on here don't have some questions for the panelists. So please jump in. I also saw that there was a question to the attendees. So if you don't have a question for the panelists, please jump in terms of what has been sort of presented thus far or discussed thus far, sort of speak to you in your own organization or your own individual work. Please jump into the conversation in the time that we have left, and then we'll do some wrap up. Oh, go ahead, Don.
Something I might say, there's somebody in the audience that I was trying to work her into the presentation, and I just sort of ran out of time. But I'm wondering if Denise from Clock Your Skills in the UK might be interested in talking about what she's doing, working with BIPOC audiences in creative industries and getting people to follow their passions, be recognized for their skills in creative industries, and taking those back and forth from industry and the academy. Denise, are you able to come on and talk about that? Sorry, I was trying to set it up with her, but I didn't have a way of asking her
No,
privately.
I've raised Denise up to the panel. Denise Stanley, is that correct?
Okay,
Yes, that's right. Can you hear me, everyone?
We sure can.
You can.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, how lovely. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and it's so inspiring for me to hear that the work that I've been doing since the 80s, working with Lille University in the early days in Suez, has actually also transferred across in the way that you've described. You mentioned a story earlier on, and I think probably the best way of sharing where I am with Clock Your Skills, you can find that website www.clockyourskills.com, is to talk about two individuals. One is a blacksmith who lives and works in Hungary, who, as a middle-aged man with no formal qualifications, is one of the top blacksmiths, and he was unable to work in the university or to have any apprentices because he had no papers, no qualifications. And then he went through the process, which is a peer review, an industry, creative industries peer review process run by Clock, to become a sector expert, which is mapped to level 7 master's level outcomes. He now has 100 apprentices in the university because he now has a master's degree equivalent through Clock. Another example is a Black woman songwriter, quite successful with Ivor Novello Awards for songwriting. She graduated, if you like to use that word, from Clock in 2017. She had no formal qualifications, had done a bit of teaching for Tileyard, which is an industry-centered education centre. And she is now the only songwriter who is the president of the Performing Rights Society in the UK. She's certainly the only Black woman songwriter. And she put herself forward because what Clock does is exactly what you describe, making invisible skills visible. And the first part of that mirroring process is for people to understand who they really are, what they can do, particularly those that have been told all their lives what they can't do. And so it's hugely powerful to be part of this international community that Clock has built over the last 6 or 7 years after 10 years of research in 15 countries. And just to build off what Don was saying, we now have a bridge between non-formal and formal education, informal included with non-formal, in that someone could go to university at level 4 and hate it, and then move into industry in SMEs or self-employment, and carry on with clock and do level 5 with 120 credits. And then they can work for 2 years or 3 years and then become a sector expert with a master's qualification, or they can go in and do a 1-year BA top up in professional practice. What I'm really, really excited about, which I just want to share, and then I will be quiet, is that I've been a celebrant as part of my life, and I've done too many tributes to dead people. And what Clock is doing now is a level 8, a PhD through practice done by 12 people who recognize your contribution to community or to industry or to education. And that PhD is done so that you have that recognition whilst you're still alive and you celebrate it, rather than the people that you leave behind when you die. So that's kind of 3 stories that I just want to share that might give you some insight into the Clock Your Skills program, which is, as I say, across the creative industries.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, great.
So I'm seeing a couple of questions, and I know this conversation could literally go on for more hours, and I'm going to have to make sure that people please come to our open recognition group, and I can send out more information, but email info@openskillsnetwork.org. And I think there was one question though, if we want to read it, and we can end on there, because this is something that comes up quite a lot, and I'm now scrolling past it. Is from Kathy. How do we bring this language down to our own communities, especially when they're still learning about badges, credentials, and the idea that you do not have to head to post-secondary college? We live in a college-dominated region. It would be good to have terms and analogies that are simple, practical, and understandable to everyone. And I think that is a good way for us to think forward in the deliverables of the Open Recognition Group, to really be communicating exactly what Denise so beautifully said, what Crystal, so, what all of the panels have said thus far, that this is happening in individual institutions, and how do we really promote this much further in a way that everyone can understand. And the last thing I would say too, which is from Jose, if people are able to be recognizers, can there be standards, or is this an antiquated system of authentication that flies in the face of Concrete and other frameworks of inclusive validation? Anybody want to take that in 20 seconds or less?
Can I just say on Kathy's one,
Yeah.
and I've put this enough times in the chat, but if you go to badges.community and go through to the Keep Badges Weird community, there's a whole group of people, including us, who are there to help you with this. There's little courses where you can find out more about it. But there's literally a thread on different kinds of metaphors for open recognition versus credentialing, all that kind of stuff that might help you. And I've linked to some slides which have more of Brian's images, for example, which often help people with metaphors. Other people might want to jump into Jose's question, though.
Yeah, and I'm also very happy to make Jose's question the first thing we start our agenda at the working group meeting. So just putting in a plug for that. But Don, go ahead. I know you can't. And it's 3:00. If people need to pop off, we understand. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I would just say briefly, it's about being transparent about who's recognizing and what you're recognizing for. I think documentation inside badges can be very poor. But if you say, I'm giving you peer recognition, and this is what I'm saying in my peer recognition, and I'm communicating it within a context, I think that is fine. And then another organization might say, well, we're an accredited organization. You did this is a micro credential. You did this summative assessment. It meets these outcomes. That's another one. It's just about being transparent.
Crystal, Kerry, do you have anything to say? Because I've always got something to say.
Yeah, but yeah.
No, I know we have to go. I would love to talk about this topic more, and how algorithms and things can supersede, like, what is out there. But just real briefly, I know you're going to say something, Doug, but I just want to take an opportunity to thank Julie and Justin for starting this group, so we have a place to talk about this.
And calling out, Serge, Nate, Carrie, Don, there are people who worked on the proposal for the open working group and really did an incredible job evangelizing and bringing up the importance of having a group like this as part of OSN. So I really want to call out their work. And this is just an announcement. And again, we can keep the conversation going if people don't have a hard stop, but just join us for the OSN, the How to Build Your Skills Library. So because we didn't get into technical conversations, this would be a really nice companion for this conversation, right? So if you're really, we are going to probably, our working group going to be going to the showcase because we're thinking about how can we open up a collaborative instance of OSMIT and really start thinking about adding people's skills. So yeah. And Doug, as we go out, what would you like to say? Anybody final words?
So, I mean, given that this is being recorded, if people have got 5 minutes, maybe we can record answers to this instead of rushing. So people often talk about standards and quality and that kind of thing. And it's a good question to ask, like how on earth do we decide that there's not a million badges and you can't figure out what's going on, etc. But, you know, on my wall next to me, I've got my doctoral certificate. No one has ever asked me to take that out of a frame and prove that it's legit. Yeah, ever. I could have just printed it out on a piece of paper. No one, just everyone takes it on for granted. In addition, when I say that I've been to Durham University, which is a world top 100 university, people say, do you mean Durham, North Carolina? As in like Duke University? And I'm like, no, I mean, like literally. So what I'm trying to say is that you can have standards, you can have recognition, which means something in one context, and people can literally have never heard of this very prestigious thing. So when we're talking about standards, it's like always contextual, and it's standards for what, and whether you even recognize that that's something prestigious or not. So that's just my lived experience of dealing with standards and quality and that kind of stuff.
I think that's a great point.
That's a great point.
Because I think it just comes up constantly when it is generally the first thing that we really have to address. And I think, and you know, I know Serge is on this call, it really is about trust, right? And I think to Don's point around transparency as well. But yeah.
I'm wondering if I could just add one thing, which is
Yeah.
the thing about CLOC is it's a progression framework. You can recruit at industry entry level for diversity, but if you don't have a framework for transparent progression, no one gets to be a senior manager from that diverse group. And so I think it needs to be an architecture that takes people from where they are through the journey of where they want to go and how they want to go. And if employers, small, medium or large, are serious about inclusion, equality and diversity, they need to have a transparent progression framework. And that's one of the key reasons we built that CLOC framework.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, cool. Justin, any final words? Anyone? And I'm just putting in the chat like where you can get the recording, and we can work with our pals at OSN to get the slides sent out as well.
Yeah. No final words other than to encourage people to come to our Open Recognition Workgroup and continue the conversation.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of important work to be done.
Yeah.
And I do have a final word.
Yay.
And I always have a final word. It's kind of the final word. Our work groups are this engaging all the time. They are usually, we get to the end of the work group all going and. So the more the merrier. I really enjoy being a member of this team or of this group. And I look forward to our next conversation in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's true.
Me too, Crystal. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks again, all four of you. Really super helpful and thankful. Thank you for your time.
This was fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Oh, there's the hat.
Hi, everyone.
Now I recognize you. I recognize
Oh, the
you.
hat.
There's the hat.
Take
And
care,
thanks,
everybody.